Well, joining me in the studio for the Thursday panel is Liberal MP Jason Falinski and Labor MP Matt Keogh, who in record time has just made it to your seat. So well done.
I just couldn't give up the opportunity to be Officer Jason.
Jane wanted to go, and I said, no, we have to wait for Matt.
I know.
We can't start this without Matt.
Yeah, all right, well, you catch your breath. I'm going to ask you first, Jason Falinski. Pat Conahan there joining calls from within the coalition to increase the rate of New Start. How seriously should the government be considering this?
Not seriously at all.
Why?
I mean, if you actually want to help people who are from low economic opportunity environments get ahead, then what you need to do is create pathways to work. What we know is Australia has it has the most generous tax welfare transfer systems in the world. It's 29 times the United States, 19 times France, 17 times the average of Nordic countries. So we have very generous welfare tax transfer system. But we need to get 98% of people who are on New Start also get other forms of supplementary payments.
Up to about $50 a
the
day.
question is, how do you get people off welfare into work? Because what we know is that people who come from low economic opportunity environments on welfare, life expectancy is lower, incidence of violent crime is higher, drug use is higher. All the sorts of markers that we look at for people who live full potential lives are absolutely lower across the board. You have to get people off welfare into work. Now, if there are programs that we should invest in to do that, I'm happy to talk about that.
Okay, well, no one's disputing that. I mean, everybody says that, work is ultimately the goal here, but people like your former Prime Minister, John Howard, ACOS, the welfare group, and we've got a leading economist, Chris Richardson. So it's not like, and this is coming from the business community, who all say that at the moment it's so low that it's a barrier to employment.
Jane, I've heard that. So if the BCA, let me deal with each one of them. John Howard is just wrong, and I think if you had the opportunity to sit down and actually go through those discussions, he would probably come to the same conclusion that the rest of us have who've gone through this process. The BCA's argument is, it's difficult because people turn up, they can't get there because of public transport, their clothes don't look great. Well, I would say to the BCA and its members, if you are serious about helping people on low income and from low economic opportunity environments get work, then look past the clothes they're wearing, ask them if they're going to be able to reach the job interview, you make the changes that are necessary to help them off the welfare roll into your businesses. Chris Richardson undertook a report that was commissioned by ACOS. ACOS is doing its job, which is frankly put to make those arguments on behalf of people on welfare. I get that. But the BCA, they can speak directly to business about what business can do to help to look past how people look and to help them into work. Matt's caught his
all right,
now, so.
Matt Keogh, Labor.
Where to start with that?
Labor backs an increase now. It hasn't actually put a figure on it. So the likes of Chris Richardson, ACOS, have said a $75 a week increase is what is needed to allow people to actually buy the clothes, get to their job interviews. Is that the kind of figure that Labor would consider?
Well, we absolutely think it needs to be increased. As hard as it is for people on my side of politics to deal with, we're not in government. Government is the one that has to act. But just hearing Jason, my head explodes. I had a guy sitting in front of me at a mobile office only this week who's in his early 50s. He's been unemployed for months. We know that older Australians find it much harder to find work. They're the vast majority of the people that actually are on New Start. The government has cut back on programs to assist elderly Australians or older Australians from being able to get back into work. And the thing is, I hear what Jason says about we should invest in all of these programs. Absolutely we should. In fact, you should. Your government should do that. But in the meantime, when I've got a guy sitting across from me who's down to his last 86 cents because the rate of New Start is woefully inadequate, how is that fair? Jason says it's generous, but you can't live on it. But to compound this issue, we know that those who are on the lowest incomes in Australia are the ones who spend the most. We've got a set of economic circumstances right now, which last year, before bushfires, before coronavirus, the economy was going into freefall under this government. It's not getting any better. The economy would benefit from the stimulus that we would see by increasing New Start, but the individuals, we're talking about real people on the ground in my community, which are those poorer communities that you just talked about, they need this additional money, and the government needs to seriously think about how it delivers on it. It needs to do it.
Okay, you mentioned bushfires, coronavirus. We know that both of these, disasters, crises, whatever you want to call them, have put huge pressure on the budget. If you're going to increase the New Start allowance, it's going to cost a couple of extra $1 billion a year. Can the budget actually afford it? Is that a responsible thing right now?
Clearly, increasing the rate of New Start would be an extra additional cost to government. As I mentioned, people on the lowest income spend the most. A lot of that income ends up coming back to government in the forms of the GST that they pay on goods and services, on income taxes.
So it'd be like a stimulus,
economic stimulus. You will see actually a lot of that money come back to government. But at the end of the day, government's got to do what's in the best interest of the entire Australian community. I mean, they've been saying themselves, crab walking back from their previous commitment that apparently they'd already got a budget surplus when really they haven't. What government needs to do is do what the economy requires, what Australians require of them, and they can't just go and blame coronavirus and bushfires to say that that's what's affecting their surplus. The economy was going down beforehand. We saw figures come out today that showed that we had economic growth of about 0.4% in the September quarter. People are predicting now only 0.2 to 0.5 in the December quarter. That's before these crises even started. We know the March quarter will probably be worse. The government's mismanagement of the economy, though, has been going on for a very long time.
So Labor has put forward a number of possible ideas for stimulus, if it's going to get to that, because, of course, the economy is worsening because of these series of crises. Do you think that the New Start allowance should be the first priority in terms of if you want to get money into the economy, this is the first thing the government should consider?
I think it's absolutely got to be in that top list of things that the government considers: increasing New Start, bringing forward infrastructure spend, looking at making sure that we're seeing the defence spend actually happening in Australian businesses with Australian jobs being created. All of those things are things that government needs to be doing, but bringing forward infrastructure that unlocks the productivity of the nation would be a great start. Looking at New Start, which puts money back into the economy and looks after the most vulnerable people in Australia as well.
All right, moving on to another topic this week has been...
well, I was just going to say, I mean, this is just voodoo economics, and you know it. I mean,
it's totally voodoo economics.
It is absolutely voodoo.
The Laffer curve was voodoo economics. We both know that was what George Bush called it.
Works, and the other thing is,
and we have, it has not been.
Are you going to start arguing about the twin deficits theory? The question here is, this is voodoo economics, because we know that what we have in Australia is a productivity challenge.
Absolutely.
And allocating more money to
government.
people who don't work. Well, it started under your government, and we've been trying to fix it, and you've blocked every major single reform.
Okay, let's move on. Let's move on to this. We're broadening this out into a big debate.
Paying people not to work.
Okay. No, it's looking after people.
All right.
Looking after people is finding them jobs, Matt, not...
Okay, both of you had to say on this. I accept both arguments. Thank you very much for your time. Now, Jason Falinski, the other... No, it's great. It's good to have a lively chat. It's a Thursday, we need the energy. Jason Falinski, just picking up something Trent Zimmerman, your colleague, was saying earlier about the 2050 target. The government's obviously considering. Well, I think you know his views about the net zero emissions by 2050. You're in favour of adopting this target, is that fair to say?
Well, look, what I'm in favour of is us getting a roadmap out on the table so that, look, starting from the beginning, I think the big problem in the climate debate for the last decade and a half has been that the electorate has perceived it as being them being told what to do from on high. The importance of a roadmap is that the electorate can see, if you want to get to net zero, these are the things that you need to do. These are the trade-offs that you need to have. Those of us who are in favour of getting to net zero as quickly as possible can start to have that discussion with the community, see what they're willing to accept, see what they're not willing to accept. And from that point forward, I think we can have a real and honest discussion with people engaged in the issue. Just declaring, oh, we're going to have net zero by 2050 is all well and good, as they did in the United Kingdom. In fact, they legislated for that. And now they're going through the process of, well, how do we do that? And people are starting to realise we're not sure we want to make some of those trade-offs. One of which is, instead of 8 new nuclear power reactors, they're talking about building 16.
Yeah.
And so, you know.
So we know that under the Paris Agreement, we have locked into a 2030 target.
Yep.
Later this year, the next round of global climate change talks will be happening in Glasgow. So the government will have to have a decision by then on what it's going to do. Yep. Wasn't a 2050 target effectively what we signed up to with the Paris Agreement? So no, the Paris Agreement talks about reaching net zero in the second half of this century. Yep. We are committed to doing that. So what, mate, it could be a post-2050 target? So it could be, so by 2099, we are committed to reaching net zero. We have to under our agreements. People like me, people like Trent, people like a lot of other people in the Liberal Party would like to see us meet that target a lot earlier. By 2050? Well, even earlier if you can. But the question is, what are the trade-offs required to do that? Let's get that roadmap on the table and see what it looks like. All right, well, Matt Keogh, well, that was a great endorsement of what Labor's just outlined. Well, that Labor has. We're committed to net zero emissions by 2050, and before the next election, we will be consulting with the community, working with the resources sector, working with unions, working across sectors in the Australian community to develop exactly what that plan will be that will take us there. The difference between Jason and I is that we're in opposition. We've said where we want to go to. Now,
now. That's the first thing you have to do if you want a roadmap, is go, well, where do you want to go? And then we can work our way there, and that's what we will develop and release before the next election. What the Morrison government is talking about is this, technology instead of taxes plan, which is apparently a roadmap. They haven't said where we're going. So I don't know how you have a roadmap without knowing where you're going. I'm glad to see people like Jason and Trent and others have said, yeah, actually that is a good target, and I agree with them. You need to have a plan for that, and that's what we're doing now. We've been clear with the Australian people. This is where we want to go, and we're going to work with you about how we get there.
Has Labor taken a risk, though, by announcing so early on in I suppose, its opposition years what the target's going to be? Are you exposing yourself to attacks?
We're exposing ourselves to the criticism of Jason Falinski, but what we are being clear of, this is where we want to go, and now we're going to work with the Australian people, all sectors of the community, about how do we get there in the best way. And that takes time. Like, if we came out and did this in 2 years' time and said, bang, this is where we're going, people rightly would say, well, you've just sprung this on us. Jason's just given a great example about why you do it the way that we're doing it. No, set out the target, this is where we want to go, we'll now work with the Australian community to develop the plan.
Before they have any idea how you're going to get there, and we saw that on Sunday.
This is like question time. Everything's just really descending.
I just want to congratulate Jason for a fantastic endorsement of the Labor strategy.
Matt Keogh, how do you allay concerns, particularly in the coal community, that people in those communities will lose their jobs under ambitious climate change targets?
Well, I think actually what we need to hear is from the government. The government's not. The government is not being clear with coal communities, any resources communities, or the Australian public about what the effect on them is of their policies. Now, firstly, there's a complete lack of energy policy from this government, but even with the target that they have outlined and where they're apparently trajecting to go, they haven't been clear with those communities about what that means for them. And they are the ones in government. They need to be clear about what their plans and their complete inaction in areas will deliver for those communities. We will work with those communities in developing our plan. They will understand it. I have no doubt that they will feel safe under what Labor is going to be proposing at the next election. But what is the government saying to those communities?
All right, Jason Falinski, Matt Keogh, I'm very sorry. You're going to have to go to question time now and shout it out because we've run out of time. Thank you so much for joining me today for a very, very lively debate.
Thank you.